welcome to the Back Porch Kitchen. My name is Lindsay. I'm a stay-at-home mom of 4 kids, and this channel is all about how I balance my mom life, my wife life, with my chronic illnesses. So we post every Sunday at 5 p.m. Eastern time, so I hope that you'll join us. This video is actually the second in a 3-part series called Let's Talk, and this 3-part series is actually all about my chronic illnesses, kind of all of the things that I deal with on a day-to-day basis. I will actually link in the ID card up above the first video, and that covered fibromyalgia and my chronic Lyme. So hopefully you'll take a look at that, and you'll get kind of some disclaimers and some backstory. So it might be useful to watch that video before you watch this one. Before we actually get into what I want to talk about, I just want to kind of define chronic illness. And the CDC actually says that it is any disease, disorder that lasts for more than a year and that requires ongoing treatment and or that alters your day-to-day life. So you'll see that I have my computer here in front of me, and that's because I have a horrible memory. And I've just written down, I do an outline because I'm that kind of person, kind of when I was diagnosed with different things and symptoms, and I'll also put some links in the description box below. So if you want to learn more about anything or some of these symptoms sound familiar to you, you might want to talk to your doctor about them. In this video, we're going to talk about my migraines, we're going to talk about chronic fatigue syndrome, and then also epilepsy, as well as something called functional neurological disorder, but we'll get into that later. I'm kind of go from least, figuratively speaking, all of them are no fun, but go from migraines working up towards the epilepsy. So I was diagnosed with migraines, I think it was about 5th or 6th grade. I was very much school age and I was having them, and I went to the doctor. They went away after a while. I don't know if it was just part of growing. I have no clue. But they went away after a little while. But then in 2019, after I had my son, he's 16 months old now, and you might hear him in the background because he's waking up from a nap. So my mom, his Nana is here to get him if he does start waking up. So if you hear anything, it's him. In 2019, they came back with a vengeance, and I started on medication. I was on something, I can't remember the name of it, but now I'm on amitriptyline, which I take every night. It's a nightly medication. It also is supposed to help with anxiety or depression, but I use it for migraines. It's not an immediate response medication, so you don't take it as soon as you're getting a migraine. It's supposed to be in your system all the time. So when I have migraines, it's a very focused headache. So it's not like a tension headache, which kind of goes around your whole head, feels like a rubber band. Mine gets right behind my right eye, and it's specifically my right eye. It's never the left, it's always the right. And it'll get to the point where it comes down kind of behind my eye into my jaw. And I'll start to know I'm getting a migraine, usually because my vision is impacted. Over the years of going through chemotherapy, which we'll talk about cancer in the 3rd part of the series. My vision has been affected anyway, but it's a very acute onset of blurriness. It's almost as if everything has an aura to it. Everything is very fuzzy. There aren't any hard edges. You know, if you look at a door, there's not a rectangular door. Everything is kind of blown out. Hearing wise, it's also like I'm almost, if you're underwater, if you're swimming, if you hear something underwater, it's distorted. When I'm getting a migraine, that's kind of how I hear things. And I also have pretty severe nausea when I'm getting a migraine, or I'm in the midst of a migraine, and it will even go to vomiting depending on how bad the migraine is. So it's definitely no fun. 0 out of 10, would not recommend. But it's just something that I deal with. Unfortunately, they tend to be worse. I tend to get more of them during, like, kind of leading up to my cycle. It's very unfortunate. It's probably just because of all the hormones that us women have at that time. So they tend to be more frequent and worse in that week beforehand. Super fun. But it's something I deal with that I've learned to kind of navigate, but they are very challenging. And when I have a migraine and I feel one coming on, I try and be as cognizant of that as possible and try and take it easy a little bit. But once it hits a certain point, I'm down and out. I'm out for the rest of the day. It could be 7 hours that I can't function. And that means in the bed, curtains drawn, lights off, no sound, cold compress on my head, and even with blackout curtains, I'll have a sleeping mask on, because any sort of stimuli will make me vomit, to be honest. It's really hard. And I haven't found anything yet that will take that pain away. I just kind of have to ride the wave and let it happen. And typically, let's say at around 2 or 3 in the afternoon, I start to notice it. By around 8 or 9, it's at least gone from a 10, can't see, just kind of blinded in pain, to about a 6 or 7, which for me is tolerable. I can tolerate that. It's not fun, but I can handle it. So obviously when you have a toddler, and I also have 3, I call bonus kids, that's hard. When you have a husband, it's hard. But we've all kind of had to adapt our lives around that. Next, so that's the one thing. And I'll say I typically get maybe 1 or 2 a week, sometimes none. More often than not, though, I'll have at least 1 in a week. And like I said, the week before my cycle, it's usually, if not every day, every other day. And it's pretty horrific. So we're going to talk about some chronic fatigue syndrome. So this is a tricky one because a lot of its symptoms mimic other things. And it also tends to kind of partner up with different disorders. So chronic fatigue syndrome a lot of times goes hand in hand with chronic Lyme, which I have, and also fibromyalgia, which I have. And it's a challenging one. It's a lot of doctors are, for lack of word, they just don't want to diagnose people with it a lot of times. But people who go through it know how hard it can be. So I was diagnosed in 2010. I was actually living down in Wake Forest, and I was there's a fibromyalgia and fatigue center down in Wake Forest. There's also one in Maryland or around DC, I think. I was going there for treatment with my Lyme, and because of symptoms I was having, they diagnosed me with chronic fatigue syndrome. I've had it, and I was probably dealing with it before that. It was just never diagnosed. So with that comes a lot of brain fog, confusion, issues with concentration. And again, if you watch the first video, again, I'll link it up above, chronic Lyme has those same issues as this fibromyalgia. So all of these things compound each other. So to help me with that, I take a lot of notes. I write things down. I try not to ever rely on my memory because it's very unreliable, unfortunately. So I put notes in my phone. I put things on my calendar. I write things down on notepads. Otherwise, Lord knows where I would be. Another thing is poor sleep. So I've had insomnia for years, 4 years. And that's also part of chronic fatigue. And you would think because of the name, it means you would be tired all the time, but it's not necessarily, for me at least, sleepy tired. It is utter exhaustion. It's your body has nothing to give. So I could be super fatigued and not be able to go to sleep, which is extremely infuriating, especially when you're up at 3, 4, 5 in the morning and your body is so exhausted, your brain almost hurts from exhaustion, but you can't sleep. It's hard to deal with. For a long time, I got put on trazodone, which is a sleep medication. If you're having issues with sleeping, I actually highly recommend it. It's non-habit forming. I was on, I think it was the 50 milligram pills, and I stopped taking it when I was pregnant just because while they say you shouldn't take anything while you're pregnant, like a sleep medication, they also say mom's health is important. So if you're tired, if you're fatigued, if you can't function, that's only going to be harder on the baby. So they did say I could take it, and I started taking it in this kind of the second trimester. But it was fantastic. I never had any issues on it. So if you're having issues with sleeping, you might talk to your doctor about it and see if that's something that might work for you, and just try it out. Another thing that comes with chronic fatigue is dizziness, and it can strike at any time. For me, it almost feels like I'm on a boat. I have motion sickness anyways. So it almost feels like I'm on a boat. Everything's kind of swirling. That's how it feels for me. Or just almost, if you stand up too quickly and you get that kind of sudden, whoa, what's going on here? You almost have to sit down again or let it pass. It's that, but it's extended. It doesn't tend to last too long for me, but it does happen, and it's inconvenient. Also, another thing with chronic fatigue is not only insomnia, but sleep that's not restorative. So you wake up, let's say you've had, hooray, you've had 10 hours of sleep. You wake up feeling like you hadn't slept a wink. That's very common. A lot of times people, when they're having that symptom, they get tested for sleep apnea, because it's another thing that can happen with sleep apnea, because your body is waking itself up to try and breathe. You don't really have a restful, you don't hit that REM sleep because your body's kind of jolting itself to be able to breathe and stay alive. So it's the same with the chronic fatigue syndrome, minus your body jolting itself. But it's almost like your body is so fatigued, it can't get enough energy to restore it, to kind of recharge its battery. It can't do that. So this plays into the insomnia, and it plays into cognitive issues, the brain fog, because if you're not rested, your brain is not working at its optimal, rate. So these things just compound each other. And obviously the more tired you are and the more crappy you feel, you don't get that sleep to recharge you. It just compounds into the next day and to the next day. And I think a lot of people aren't aware of this, so they think that people are maybe being lazy or just kind of complaining, but it's very real, and the effects trickle into every aspect of your life. So in the first video, I talked about that with Lyme disease, how I do energy budgeting, and every activity has a cost. This is the same for chronic fatigue. So for example, filming right now, I took the time to obviously get ready. Hate to break it to you, normal days I don't have makeup on. Well, I had no hair to do, so it doesn't matter, but this takes energy for me to film and set up and put makeup on. For a normal average person, it wouldn't, and it didn't used to be that hard for me. But as I've gotten older, the more things I've gone through, the more these activities, even kind of nominal activities, the higher of a price they have for my body. So this is really the only thing I'm doing today, is besides keeping up with my toddler and doing normal things, but this will exhaust me. So I have to think, and others with chronic fatigue syndrome or chronic Lyme fibromyalgia have to say, is this activity worth it? If I do this, what do I have to sacrifice or put off till tomorrow or the next day? Or if I want to do a big activity, is it okay if I'm in bed or I can't function? Am I willing to accept that cost? So it's kind of perpetual cost-benefit analysis for energy and for cognitive abilities. And that's unfortunate, but something that someone like myself has gotten used to, and a lot of people in this position have to get used to. And that actually goes into my next point, which is we're going to talk about epilepsy and seizure-like events. So I have something called functional neurological disorder, which is a central nervous system issue, as is fibromyalgia. And so when you have one central nervous system issue, you're much more likely to have additional. So basically my central nervous system doesn't work properly. I call it short-circuiting. And we found this out because I actually went to an inpatient epilepsy unit, which is at UVA in Charlottesville, Virginia. And I was 24-hour day video EEG monitoring, and they were able to track events. So in order to be diagnosed with epilepsy, you have to have kind of inappropriate electrical activity in your brain, where your brain is misfiring. So I was having events where my brain there weren't any abnormal electrical firings, but there were very real physiological effects. So my heart rate went up to 250 beats per minute, which is extremely high. Normal heart rate should be 60 to 100 beats. When you're pregnant, that goes a little bit higher because you're growing a baby. But 250 is really high. So they call it severe sinus tachycardia, basically where your heart is just beating super, super fast. But it was only in those events. My pupils were blown out. I mean, they were just completely dilated. And the lights are on, but no one was home. I couldn't control what my body was doing. My hands or my face would be making certain movements that have served no purpose. It's like I can't talk. I can't really function during those moments. So it very much looks like the lights are on, but nobody is home. They were able to capture that, and that's how they were able to diagnose me with functional neurological disorder. This is again, a central nervous system issue. It is a physiological thing. It has real effects. This can be brought on by trauma. So a lot of people who have been sexually abused, physically abused, people with PTSD from maybe military, kind of stress-related factors, if left unresolved, can cause this because your body needs an outlet. So if it doesn't have an outlet, like therapy, some way to get those feelings and that stress out, it manifests itself into your body, into your brain. So for me, it's the more stressed I am, and by stressed, I don't necessarily mean typical stress, which obviously would play a role, but if I'm doing a lot in a day, that's more stress I'm putting onto my body, and my body is already in a weakened state. So the more physical stress I put on myself, the more likely I am to have an event. If there's a lot of emotional stress, the more likely I am to have an event. So this severely, it limits a lot of my activities, a lot of things I can do, because we have to say, okay, well, is X worth Y? We know Y is a very likely outcome. Obviously, it's not guaranteed. Sometimes my body pleasantly surprises me, but it usually doesn't. So is X worth Y? If not, you can't do X. And that's challenging, because you have to limit things that sometimes make you happy just because of how impactful and a negative impact it can have on your life. And it's something that, since there's not really one cause, there's not one treatment. So you have cognitive behavioral therapy, which is, again, teaching kind of how to energy budget and activity budget, which I'm very type A, and I like to do what I want when I want to do it. So when I can't, and I have to be more aware and limit myself, that's something I find really, really challenging. And it can be very frustrating when you have something that you really want to do. For me, it's cooking. I love to cook. That's one of the ways I show that I love people and how I show that I care. And so when I can't do it, that's emotionally challenging for me and mentally challenging for me, which then again, there's this domino effect where, because this is really challenging for me and I'm not happy about it, and can be an event. So that's hard to deal with. On the other side of the spectrum is, I have what's called temporal lobe epilepsy. So in an EEG, they have tracked that there is abnormal electrical firing in my temporal lobe. And I've had kind of your normal in-office EEG, as well as a take-home 24-hour like sleep-on EEG. And they show the temporal lobe activity. And unfortunately, the temporal lobe is one of the places where your brain really focuses on memory, short-term memory especially, and emotion kind of assignment. So perceiving other people's emotions, and then also kind of assigning emotions to what's going on in here. I think anyone who knows me would say I'm not the most emotional person. I've been accused of being robot-like, just because I tend to be a very logical, linear person. So having kind of misfirings in that part of the brain, for me, isn't especially fantastic, because it limits my ability to maybe accurately perceive someone else's emotions. So that's hard. But this epilepsy is, a lot of times, is what they call focal seizures. So again, lights are on but no one's home. I can look kind of awake and there, my eyes are open, but I can't communicate to you. And what you say to me means nothing. It's almost as if, you remember in the Charlie Brown with the peanuts, you like the womp womp, that's what it sounds like. It means nothing. You could be speaking in any language and it doesn't make sense to me. Same thing with reading. I can read and it would make zero sense to me. And there's nothing you can really do to prevent that. I'm on a seizure medicine that I take twice a day, every day, at a fairly high dose. But the focal seizures during them is just, I just have to have my time to come out of it. And again, my eyes could be open or they could be closed. I could be making kind of weird facial movements, not so much what you think of a traditional seizure where you're convulsing and that, but just weird facial movements that, again, are purposeless. But I can't control them. I'm not in control of what I'm doing. And I do also have the traditional seizures, which are tonic-clonic, or the convulsion seizures. It's what, if you think of a seizure, that's what you think of. But overall, those seizure meds have helped. I haven't had one for quite a while, which is fantastic, because for a long time I was having them, and I was having them on a very regular basis. And my seizures were actually under control for a long time. And then when I got pregnant with my toddler, they started to come back. And that was pretty scary, being pregnant. And then when after I had him, they came back, tenfold. And I would have the point where afterwards I would hear a report from my husband or from my mom where I was I had finished the convulsing part, but coming out of it, I was in so much fear, and I was just screaming because I didn't know who anyone was, and I was telling people to get away from me, and I didn't know who my son was. So I'd say, who's that? Whose baby is that? And have no clue. And then when I finally kind of came to completely, I didn't remember anything. The last thing I would remember up to a little bit before the seizure, and then that was it. So I have no recollection of anything that goes on. I'd be spitting up on myself, vomiting, and I couldn't control any of it. And it's a really scary feeling to know that this can happen, and it does happen, and you're just along for the ride. And it can happen at any moment. I don't go anywhere now, but before COVID, I could be in a grocery store. It could be a seizure, and I can't do anything about it, about who's around me, about how they handle things. So it's very scary. And even though now I'm not having the full-on convulsive seizures, even the focal seizures, which again are lights on when no one's home, or the functional neurological disorder events, we call them events. I don't know what else you would want to call them, episodes, whatever. It's scary to have those. And with the functional neurological disorder, those events, it's not as scary afterwards, but with the ones that are the temporal lobe epilepsy, it's pretty scary. And you feel very insecure about what's going on. Luckily, I have a fantastic support system, and they're really good at loving me and kind of being gentle with me and letting me come to in my own time. But for actual seizures, that time can be 30 minutes to an hour before I'm kind of fully there. And I kind of slowly gain back my faculties. With the events, it's more afterwards. I may have a couple of minutes of getting myself together, but I'm pretty much back to being me pretty quickly. But before you even get to the events or to the seizures, one of the things that you experience, for me at least, is an aura. And an aura is like the lead up, where about 5 seconds or 10 seconds before, I know something is about to happen. And so most of the time I'll sit down or I'll lay down or get myself into a safe position, a safe space. But it's pretty quickly beforehand, so you better react quickly, for me at least. And the only thing I can compare this to is, which I'm sure a lot of adults can sympathize with, is when you've had too much to drink, but you don't know it until you go to stand up. So you're sitting down, you're enjoying yourself, you've been drinking, and you stand up, and all of a sudden, it feels like you've just done a keg stand at a frat party, and you're kind of discombobulated. And that's, for me, what it feels like when the aura hits, is it feels like I've had way too much to drink way too quickly, and I have to kind of get myself into a safe place because everything is spinning. And that's a scary feeling, but I'm glad that I have those, because a lot of people don't have auras, and it's just the seizure just hits. So at least I have something where I can get myself into a safe position, safe space. If someone's around me, I can say, like, I don't feel good. And my mom or my dad or my husband know what that means. They know that I'm most likely about to either have a seizure or an event. And my husband usually tries to stay close to me, so if I do start having a full-on convulsive seizure and I start choking or gagging, which I'm known to do, he can roll me onto my side and make sure I'm safe. But these greatly impact my life, because again, if there are ones that are brought on by stress and ones that are just brought on by my brain, and I might not even feel stress, but my body feels it. So I can do certain things to help mitigate those, but I can't eliminate them on my own. So even with therapy, even with medication, they're still there. And so I have to adapt my lifestyle to try my best to prevent them. No, I can't eradicate them, but accept that. So I was saying that's acknowledge, accept, adapt. You can't possibly deal with something if you don't acknowledge its existence. So I've acknowledged that these exist. I've acknowledged that all of my chronic illnesses or conditions exist. I accept them for what they are. I accept that means that I have to mitigate my own damages. I have to pay attention to my activities. And as frustrating as it is, it's better for me and for my family in the long run if I do that. And then I adapt. So I say, I know I need to make these changes, and I make the changes. Now, I fail on a regular basis because I'm type A and I do what I want kind of person. So I think that's probably from being the younger sister, the youngest sibling. It's no one can tell me what to do. I'm going to do what I want, but then I pay for it, usually later that day or the next day when I'm bedridden. So I'm hard-headed, and a hard head makes a soft butt. So I learn on a daily basis, or at least on a weekly basis, that I need to pay more attention to myself and to the signals that my body is giving me. So hopefully, if you're feeling any of these things, you say, you know what, that feels familiar. Whether it's the chronic fatigue and saying, I feel tired all the time. I wake up and I can go right back to bed. Because for me, that's a regular thing. I could wake up, I rarely get 8 hours of sleep. But let's say I get 8 hours sleep, and I can go to bed. I could wake up at 8 and want to go back to bed by 9 a.m. So if that sounds familiar to you, if you have these very intense, very focused headaches, they say, well, I think they're just headaches, but they typically tend to be behind your eyes. Talk to your doctor and say, I'm having these issues and I'm a little bit concerned and it's impacting my life. And any good physician will play investigator with you, will help you figure out what's right. It might not be migraines, but that doesn't mean there's not something they can do to help you. It might not be chronic fatigue, but that doesn't mean there's not something that they can help you with. And if you have seizures, for a long time, I was told that my seizures I were having were because of my Lyme disease. And when I started seeing my current neurologist, he said, well, that's a hypothesis, but we have no evidence of this. If we need to eliminate every possibility before we jump to one conclusion. And so he sent me, we had the EEG in office, and then the take-home EEG, and then the inpatient unit. And so we could check every box before we made a final decision. And so we had the temporal lobe epilepsy, we had that recorded, we knew that was a thing, but the other events I was having didn't 100% fit in that box. And so he took further steps to make sure we knew exactly what we were dealing with. And I'm glad that he did. It was a hard time. It was 4 or 5 days away from my baby and away from my husband and my kids, and it was hard. But we figured out what was the problem, and that's extremely important. So if you're having these issues, you feel like you've gotten an answer, but it might not be the right answer, or it might not feel right to you, it might not fit. Get a second opinion, get a third opinion, get a 10th opinion. Make sure you cover all your bases, because you can't properly be helped unless you know what the problem is. So again, it's acknowledge, accept, adapt. And make sure you feel comfortable with what you're being told. And don't hesitate. I don't care if it's your family doctor of 30 years and your grandma went there and your mom went there. Go see another doctor. They might not have the answers for you. Be your own advocate. And I said that in the first video, I'll say it in this video, and I'll say it in the third video. Be your own advocate, because no one can possibly fight for you the way you can fight for you. So I hope that this video has been educational. Again, if you can relate to something, talk to your doctor, talk to a good support system, and do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself. So again, we post a video every Sunday at 5 p.m. I hope you'll stick around. Most of the videos aren't going to be about health. I just want to get these things out of the way so that if I ever reference them in a different video, you'll know what I'm talking about. But I will always link them in the description box below. But we're going to talk about cooking. We're going to talk about day in the lives. There might be some laundry stuff in here. Just things where you can see how chronic illnesses affect my life, but don't necessarily control them, because I am not my chronic illnesses. I'm Lindsay, and there's way more to me than these things. So I hope that you'll stick around, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.